thanks a lot for agreeing to speak with me. When you left that comment, I thought, oh, interesting. I've in the past I've interviewed Chuck Hughes, um, who's had some success with music libraries, but he's worked with non-exclusive deals. And I understand you worked with Black Toast Music, right? So that was under an exclusive.
That's correct, and that's an exclusive deal. You probably remember when I found you, it was really coming at it maybe a bit backwards compared to some of your audience. I spent many years just as a touring independent, songwriter and musician, based in the Midwest for most of that time, part of the United States, but able to tour in Europe quite a bit over about 10 to 15 years. So when I was younger, my interest in licensing music and having it placed was pretty minimal. Like a lot of, I think, musicians, you kind of start out wanting to play more and write more and travel, and I got to do all that, which was wonderful. But when my wife took a position in Los Angeles, as I turned almost 40 years of age, the timing for me was about right to kind of stop the touring quite as much. And luckily, I mean, Los Angeles is one of those cities where, as you know, a lot of the placements and licensing is happening. And I was able to connect with Bob Mair. He's the owner of Black Toast Music. And his deals were all exclusive. And as you know, that can be a very scary proposition when you're talking to someone about having the exclusive rights to place your music. It took a long time for me to actually be okay with that agreement, only in that it was the beginning of my education in some ways, of having to really learn about what that meant, learn about how the publishing rights of your song, are really broken into these different parts that can generate income.
Yeah.
And, for me, Joyce, it's ended up being a wonderful relationship. It's been 11 years now. Yes, 10, 11 years since I signed that agreement with Black Toast Music. And he currently represents 70 of my songs exclusively.
Okay.
And for the most part, it's the first 5 or 6 albums that I released independently. If any of your audience members have ever been on small record labels or independent record labels, that was another fortunate thing for me. The labels that I was on in Europe, which would be primarily Holland, Germany, and then in the Midwest, a small record label, they were mostly for distributing at the time. For me, CDs were the popular format. It was but they did not take any of my publishing or ask for any of my publishing.
Yeah.
So I was lucky in that when we moved to Los Angeles, I still maintained and had all control of that. And my catalog had gotten fairly large by that point. So I do feel lucky that I maybe hit the right city at the right time for kind of where I was at in my career.
Sure. Yeah. And actually, it's something else that, like when I asked you to do this interview, you just wrote me back a couple of paragraphs, and I thought there was so much interesting stuff just in those 2 paragraphs. So hopefully we'll have some time to talk about that. But one thing that really struck me was you said, yeah, I actually got into music pretty late and only released my first album when I was around 30. So
Right.
I was wondering, can you kind of walk us through how you got started with music? Like maybe, I don't know if you started, playing the guitar really young, but then kind of just doing it as a hobby, or how you got started actually.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I did start very late, and you're right. I did not put my first album out until I was 30. And even that I would consider now a pretty rough demo. I think it's hard for a lot of musicians to look back 20, 25 years and listen to their recordings. But it was certainly a very necessary first step. I guess I grew up in a very musical, household. My parents were playing, vinyl albums. I always loved music. I never would have considered doing it for a living when I was growing up, though it wasn't really a dream of mine. I loved it though, and it was, I think for me, where I grew up, Iowa City, Iowa, it's a university town. It's a college town. It's a very vibrant, creative town. I grew up with lots of music around. But I was into athletics. I went to college on a pole vaulting scholarship, believe it or not. And I kind of, through my 20s, was living what I considered a fairly normal life. I went to college, got married shortly after that. My education background is communications, so I worked at, over the years, I've worked at many newspapers, weekly newspapers. In America, we call them alt-weekly newspapers.
Yeah.
Like a lot of newspapers, they're kind of going away, unfortunately. But that was kind of my path. At some point, I think when I was about 22, 23, I got an acoustic guitar and just started learning some very basic chords, kind of just more for fun.
Yeah.
And Joyce, it just sort of grew from there. From the moment I started learning very, basic chords, I started hearing, I didn't really want to learn other people's material. I started hearing my own melodies, and more importantly, my own lyrics. And that's really when, for at least 10 years, it became more that white hot passion where all I wanted to do was really just write songs. I was, not a great engineer, but I tried to learn how to record in my basement even then. I probably didn't write a song that I'm still happy with today until I was at least 25, 26. And I just, went to a lot of open mics and slowly just kind of started playing. I had a lot of support. Like I said,
So you were playing your stuff, like, sorry to interrupt, you were playing at those open mics, you were playing your stuff, right? Because if you weren't really interested in, okay, cool.
Well, I mean, I think I had to use some cover songs. If I look back on it now, just to learn, just as practice for my own fingers, I think I probably was very into groups like Neil Young or John Fogerty and Creedence Clearwater Revival. That's kind of the stuff I was influenced by. Maybe Johnny Cash a little bit. But I quickly started writing my own songs. I never had any interest in being anything else other than a songwriter who was creating his own music. And my city that I grew up in was very supportive of that. I feel lucky that there were many musicians who were making a living at about every level. I'm very lucky that I kind of had some mentors and people that I could see in my town, and I could see a pathway for myself. I did start late, certainly, but it didn't really change, anything for me.
Yeah.
I had a day job, and like we emailed, to this day, I've gone through phases of life where I've had jobs. Some of them I would get resentful when I was younger that I had to spend that much energy doing it. As I've gotten older, I've kind of come to appreciate that for me and the way I write songs that are kind of character story songs, I absolutely need to be interacting with people.
Yeah.
And these different jobs helped me that way. And they still do. I mean, today. Now I'm a little more established, so I don't resent the job, and I have a much more flexible job now that I can really carve out time to devote to music that is uninterrupted time. But some of your audience and some of your followers probably know what I'm talking about when it gets to be very difficult to ration your energy when your main passion is really trying to create music. It's a real struggle, and I know that I've gone through that off and on for many years.
And that's actually something that really resonates with me because I don't know if you know that, but so some of the people watching will know that, but I used to work as a financial auditor, so I worked for like Fortune 500, 100 companies. Doing a job that I really enjoyed because I got to travel and it was well paid and it wasn't too demanding, and it was like I always say it's like the ideal office job. And I ended up leaving for several reasons. I just needed to take a break. In my personal life, I had to take a break from that. And I thought, okay, let's try music. I had been doing music licensing on the side, and it was going pretty well for me. So I thought, okay, let's take a sabbatical, see if I can do something more. It worked out. So I quit and started creativeandproductive.com a little over 2 years ago now. But what you say about like right now, you don't need the money, but you still have a part-time job because you need that interaction with people to write your songs. That really resonates with me, because for the past since few months, I've been thinking of taking another job. Like I've been writing I'm still writing music. I'm building this audience with Creative and Productive and really enjoying, the interactions that, getting to talk to people like you. But at the same time, I kind of miss that structure and that I could work around. So it's a little bit different from you, where, it's not, well, I'm missing being part of it, seeing people every day as well, because I work alone a lot. So, and
Right.
I'm very social. So it's true that I'm missing that part. And actually that was the first reason I thought, oh, maybe I should look for a day job to get that human connection again that I don't get as much as I used to. And then the more I think about it, the more I think, well, actually, something that worked really, really well for me when I had a day job was working on music before I went to the day job. And, having that structure and having that kind of 40-hour block of time, that instead of resenting it, I used it as a constraint, like you would use, songwriting constraints to get more creative. And so I think it's interesting that, because I don't need the money either, but I'm thinking it might be cool because, I don't know if it would be full-time or part-time. I've been thinking a lot, I thought maybe going back to, I don't think I could pull it off, like going back to a regular office job, but maybe working for a startup, where it's an exciting project and
Sure.
Stuff
I
like that.
understand
So,
completely what you're saying, Joyce. That's
yeah.
For me, it's been a very back and forth relationship that I've had with my own work schedule in the creative process, and I do get up early. My wife always has to get up very early for work, and I've gotten in the habit myself of blocking out that first early 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. time once she leaves to work on music. And so by being early, it also makes me feel like, what, I've put time into that today. Now, if I need to go do whatever I need to do for my job, I feel like, I've still given my music passion some time. It does change when it's not a necessity, right? I mean, if you really don't have to have the 40-hour a week money, it's certainly a luxury more now.
Of course.
But yeah, I've gone through periods where I've also felt like, I'm alone too much. I'm spending too much time in my own little bubble, thinking about songs, thinking about, just different ways to write music. And I could tell that I really needed more interaction. I just needed to it wasn't really helping my song writing, yeah. I didn't think. And, I'm pretty social as well. So I was missing just sort of having some of the daily connection with people. When I was more of a full-time touring musician, where that was different because I was performing and I was talking to people and talking to, venue owners, people that would come to the show, other bands on the bill. That part of my life, I was almost over social because I felt
like you're kind of craving some alone time.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's a balance. It is sometimes a difficult balance to find, but at this point, I don't resent it, and I do feel lucky at my age now. When I was younger, I can tell that I have a little less energy in general to just sort of be rationing out anyway.
So how old are you now?
I'm 51 now, and the licensing started. I signed that agreement with Black Toast Music when I was 40.
Okay.
And, I found you really online just recently when you had the very, very pragmatic list of, I have a group of about 21 songs that they're mine. And with my publisher's blessing, I'm kind of trying to take them out myself now. And that was how I found your website and, the wonderful advice, especially with the spreadsheets and the very practical, like just do this because it will make your life better when you have to copy and paste all of this information.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. And that's been kind of my recent undertaking, is to take on that more administrative challenge of how to maybe get my music into some other places.
Cool. And so, like, going back to when you started playing open mics, and you mentioned you were like, when you wrote that first album, you had some equipment, you had kind of a home studio, but like, I'm wondering, like, did it, because back then it was harder, like it was more expensive, everything was more expensive in terms of when to make music. So like, how did you what did your setup look like? Did you go for simplicity and just get the stuff out there, or were you focused on like, why did you make the album in the first place? Was it because people at your open mics were asking for an album, or did you think that you needed a demo to book more gigs? How did you get started touring? How did you make that transition from open mics to because you made a living as a touring musician as well?
I did, for a time period. Definitely, there was a time, I would say there was nearly a decade, where it happened pretty quickly. I can tell you, with your first question, back in when I released that album in '98, I probably bought the recording gear for my basement studio around 1995.
Okay.
And at the time, they had these all-in-one, they called them Roland VS880, 8-track recording machines, which was very high-tech at the time, but it was expensive. The town I lived in was not very expensive to live in, and I did have a full-time day job, so I was able to purchase one of those, couple good microphones, and the hardest part, as I think back on it, when you would send your albums to the production company, we would send them in DAT, digital audio tape, and it was very difficult for me to find that machine to be able to put, mix my album onto. Looking back, it was very, very lo-fi, but a necessary kind of first step, first stumble. And I did it because one of the songs on that album, I had won a local songwriting competition that the prize was to go to the bigger city, is Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm from, and I have 8 hours in a real studio where an engineer would record a song.
Wow.
So that was probably, and that went well. I still like the way that song sounds. It sounds like I would have sounded in that era. But that was what prompted me to want to keep recording. And it wasn't that there was huge demand for my songs at open mics. My hometown is very small. It was much more self-driven. My first album was called 30 Weight. And I called it that because my whole goal was to get that album out, just one album, by the time I was 30.
You have one called 50 Weight now.
That was my most recent one. That was kind of the 20-year bookend to that album. That was my 9th album. So I made 9 albums in that time frame. But that one, I really thought that once I made that one record, that would kind of check off this time period in my life where, okay, great, I made a CD. Perfect. Now maybe I should go to grad school, or maybe go find something else to do.
Yeah. Get a real job.
And I had a real job at the local, there was a local weekly newspaper. But, as I was going from doing these open mics to meeting other musicians, I very quickly met a group of really fantastic guys that kind of became my first real band and my first regional touring band. And within a couple years, when I made my second record, there was a independent record label that released it for us. And, you know, I was in Europe by 2002. So I know I'm covering a lot of time and ground with you here. My last name, Pardekooper, is Dutch. I'm sure I had a great grandpa that came from Holland. But that country in general embraced my music very quickly. And the booking agent, boss at Belmont Booking, still my friend today, he brought me over pretty quickly to begin my first European tours, where we would be based in Amsterdam. And so, you know, relatively, it happened pretty quickly. The group was, you know, a really fun, young group of guys from a college town. And we were at that point in life where we could really drop everything and live very poor out of a van and just sort of go try to play music.
You were already married then, so your wife didn't mind that. She was very supportive.
Did not. Also, artist. Yeah. No, she did not. Now, it certainly came with a cost. That was my first wife. I'm on marriage number 2. So it sounds like a bad country music cliche, but at the time, my first wife and I were both trying to become artists in our own fields. But at the time, it was okay. She was very supportive of it. My family was very supportive of it. My parents are kind of from that hippie generation in America where, you know, they wanted me to do this. And, you know, I was doing it in my 20s. So the very pragmatic side of me also kind of felt like, well, this is a good time to try to do this. You know, I have time to go have a regular job later. I will do this. That ended up taking up most of my, you know, late 20s, well into my mid 30s. You know, those were kind of the years when I was touring and playing and doing the things we did.
Like, how did it happen? Like, it sounds like, so you got a record label interested. You got a booking agent was taking care of that for you. Like, did you have to do anything? Like, were you like proactively looking for a label or a booking agent, or was it just that, you know, the label came because you were playing with your band? And how did it work out?
Both. The independent record label Trailer Records was already established in my area.
Okay, so it's a local, yeah.
Exactly, and they had artists. I'm not sure if you would know who Greg Brown or Bo Ramsey, Dave Moore. These are people that are from these would be the mentors, you know, generation ahead of me in some ways that I was seeing. So of course, as my band kind of started getting popular and they were doing my songs, it was a natural kind of record label for me to start with. Okay. Because of the artists that were already on it, I think that helped expose me to a European audience, which helped the booking agent become interested. Yeah. And then that kind of led to Dutch and German independent labels being interested in releasing these same records over in Europe.
So from what you're saying, like, what I'm getting from this is it sounds, because this is a world that's different for me. So I interviewed Justin Tessier from the Bluestones. It's a Canadian duo. They're really cool. You might want to check them out. And like what I got from talking to him, and I'm getting the same impression from you, is that you were like a bunch of guys having fun, making good music, and just focusing on making music you enjoy, having a good time, and being on stage. And, you know,
I think that's a good way to put it.
Because I get a feeling that nowadays with all the, you know, we have access to so much and we're so interconnected that we want to build a huge audience online where maybe actually, you know, we could just go on stage in our region and build an audience that way, and then it grows organically and you get immediate feedback instead of kind of being in your room trying to, you know, to talk to strangers that you're not going to be able to go tour there anyway to kind of cement the relationship.
Yes, no, that's I feel very lucky that the era that I came up in, I would say our band was really only concerned with putting on a good show,
Yeah.
performing live as much as we could. It was a very grassroots following that we built. We were very good about it at the time, and this is proven to be the best marketing for me, is that I started that email list that I have over 20
Mm.
years ago. And
Wow.
it was really and we would take it everywhere that we played. And that's continued to be, you know, those people that saw that band or me play anytime in the last 10, 15, 20 years, they've been my best supporters. Even,
Yeah.
you know, my most recent album, some of them have stayed on that list. Um, it was before social media. I feel kind of lucky that it grew so organically. It made it a little more special for me. The people that kind of saw me and my band during that era, we have it in our memory, and you know, it's very nostalgic for me now, but it's not going to live on YouTube forever. You know, it
Yeah.
was, you had to be there to see it. And I understand it's quite different now. I feel lucky that I was able to come up in that era because, you know, feedback was instantaneous. You could tell if people were up dancing and
Yeah.
having a fun time, and were enjoying it, you got immediate feedback. And it was real, you know, the face to
Yeah.
face, it was real. I joked that my music career was really kind of about making relationships dozens at a time, not hundreds and thousands, right? But those have grown into a lot of folks who have supported me now for many years.
And I think the method, I mean, I know there are some people who just kind of are really good at, you know, creating buzz or whatever on social media, but I still think the like strong audiences are those that are built 12 at a time, you know, dozens at a time. Still now, even though we live in an online world, like I remember when I started the website, when I started Creative and Productive, I was kind of like, okay, so how do I was asking mentors, like, how do I automate this and automate that? And because I was all about, you know, like kind of having building a system and having the, you know, just getting passive income. And I remember a mentor saying, you don't automate that, like you talk to people and you know, you try to
Right?
be as helpful as you can be, and you try to understand what they need, and little by little, you know, if something takes up too much of your time, maybe you hire someone if you need customer support, or maybe you can automate some things, but at the beginning you should just be talking to as many people as you can and building those relationships. And I've changed so much since those first few months, you know, where I was just kind of um yeah, you know, kind of following um the lifestyle thing that entrepreneurs were putting out there on the internet. And I think with music now, you know, it's just there's so many distractions that we kind of forget that, you know, we should be building those relationships like one at a time. And what you said really struck a chord with me, and it's putting on a good show. Because with music, something that I've struggled with my music is sometimes I feel like, well, you know, what's really the point of this? My music is not better than other people's music, so how do I sell it? You know, there's kind of that cold business
Sure.
uh, thing sometimes where I'm like, well, you know, can I really, how do I sell it when, you know, just thinking of, you know, what's the added value or whatever. But music is not about added value. Music is about, you know, putting on a good show and people feeling something, whether that's like feeling euphoric because they're listening to David Guetta and they want to dance, or you know, feeling touched and moved and whatever. So I think it's super important to remember those basics.
Yeah, and to try to create really from a place that gives you joy. You know,
Yeah.
as we talk more about licensing too, you know, I've had opportunities to try to create music to spec for Bob Mair at Black Toast Music, you know, where we really do get access to shows that'll be coming up that are going to have very specific needs. And I found out very early, Joyce, that's that is not for me. Like, I cannot create that way at
Awesome.
all. Which it was a good thing to know. Sometimes you kind of need to learn what you're good at, but also what sort of feeds that creativity. For me, that was a very soulless kind of way to make music, and I made a
Yeah.
couple attempts at it while I was in Los Angeles, just because I wanted to try to see if I could do it. And it felt very similar to I spent 1 year living in Nashville. For me, it was very similar to trying to co-write in a room under a formula of you call it, like, it's a Nashville system of not only co-writing, but even the kind of the keys and the genres are very specific. That wasn't for me either. My I guess best advice to any songwriter is to not worry about those things as much as really trying to tap into what inspires you the most, and kind of worry about where it might land later, you know?
I love that you say that. It's what I tell everyone as well, because one of the most common questions is, well, what libraries should I send my music to? That's like the number one question. I'm like, well, you know, what kind of music do you make? There's so many, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. But the second most common question I get is, what kind of music should I be writing? And and I understand where the question is coming from. I think we've all asked ourselves, like, how could I, we've thought of it. But I think your proof, like, your music is authentic. Like, you were a touring musician. People were feeling your shows. They were buying your albums, and it makes sense that music supervisors, who are people, chose that same music for their shows. And I saw a few of your credits, like you've got shows like Justified, a bunch of shows. Let me actually, where do you
Yeah,
have
shows
that?
like
Yeah, but
True Blood,
Sons of Anarchy, I thought, oh yeah,
Anarchy,
of course. When I read that, I was like, yeah, of course. Blue
yeah,
Bloods, I mean, but when I saw Justified, I thought as well, yes, of course, it's a perfect match. It makes complete sense. It would be weird that your music wasn't on there. I mean,
yeah,
it didn't last that long, but still, it's and I'll put a link in the post so everyone can listen to the music, maybe even before they watch the interview. But I think it's super important to remember that for people to want their music and their projects, it needs to resonate with them on a on a profound level, like on a real level. It can't just be, of course, there's a bunch of room as well for corporate inspirational tutorial or podcast type of music, and if that's fun for you to learn how to do that and to do it, then I did that for a while, just kind of as an exercise. I wanted to learn how to do inspirational music or action music and stuff like that, so I learned how to do that. But then once I knew how to do it, I didn't find it fun anymore, and I just stopped. But what you say about writing music on spec completely resonates with me as well, because I used to think I wanted to be I dreamt of writing music for film, and then I worked with a few indie filmmakers, and I thought, I don't want to do that anymore. It's it's too much trouble. It's not much fun. But anyway, so, like, back to you. Like, you were how did the Black Toast thing happen? Like,
yep.
they
That's a good
reached out to
question.
you, right?
Yes, but it wasn't without me networking. And the way this happened was shortly after we had moved to Los Angeles. I was 39, 40 at that point.
And you
I,
had stopped touring?
pretty much,
Yeah.
even to this day, I will still do some shows locally or back in my hometown, but it's very, isolated shows. By that point, I had definitely, I was not doing touring in the same way that I had been. And that's the same today. Like, I will still do some shows. Often they're benefits now in my hometown or locally. But when we moved to Los Angeles, it was absolutely a perfect time for me to kind of shift gears and think about, well, now what do I want to do with music now? I had 5 albums that I had released, that I had maintained all of the publishing rights to as the songwriter.
Yeah.
And like you said, they were, they were songs and albums that I had toured on and promoted the best I could and the best these small labels could. But I think they were a pretty good, authentic representation of just sort of what I tried to create and what moved me. When we got to Los Angeles, I started going to my PRO. ASCAP is my PRO. And they would have different events. Some of them were educational, and some of them were actually had opportunities for songwriters to kind of sit in the round and showcase songs. There was one of these West Coast songwriter showcases that they asked me to sit in on, and that was where I met my publisher, Bob Mair. It's a hard thing. I'm from Middle America and a very small state. And I have young songwriters email me fairly often now, the older I get, that will ask, do I have to move to Los Angeles or Nashville or New York City to get anyone's attention? And, I built my whole following based in the middle of America, really. The touring that we would do in Europe, I was still always a Midwestern songwriter. But I do think that still those music cities do have a lot of, people there that can help your career. So I'm always very cautious to ever tell someone to leave their home base, because I do think you need to build your home base wherever it is locally still. But I felt grateful that, my wife happened to take a job in Los Angeles at that time. Because when I met, Bob, and he heard my catalog of music, it was pretty quick. He wanting to work with me was a pretty quick decision. Me deciding it was okay to sign an exclusive agreement was a longer decision. And I did have.
How many songs did you sign at once?
I'm sorry?
How many songs did you sign? Like in that first deal, how many songs were you signing away?
Deal, I think about half. If I remember right, it was about 30. And I released at least another album or two during my 4 or 5 years that I lived in Los Angeles. Also, that's how we've kind of got up to 70 now. But I went in slowly, and he was fantastic. He and his wife run this company, and they have for over 20 years. They both have experience in the record industry. It's still, though, it's a stranger that's asking you for, the exclusive rights to your music. But the reality was I was really done promoting these albums. And, the other kind of non-exclusive deals that I saw looked fine, but I looked at what he was getting placed, and, I spoke to some of his other artists. I tried to do due diligence, and and they got back to me right away and, said wonderful things about him. And luckily, I think True Blood was the first. They ended up using 3 of my songs over the 7-year run of that show. And one of them happened very quickly. So, everything Bob told me ended up being absolutely true. The thing I liked most about what he told me was, though, that he could guarantee me nothing. And that was the hardest part. Though he was asking for exclusive right to represent me, he was very honest in saying, I love your music, but I don't know if A, B, and C music supervisor is going to love you the way I like your songs and your authentic voice and all this. So I appreciated that he didn't try to sell me on any guarantee at all. And he has also been very patient over the decade at kind of educating me on how the business works. So that's how that's a long answer to your short question, but that was how I
great.
Black Toast Music, and kind of the thought process that I was having when considering doing an exclusive deal. It forced me to get myself educated. I did have a music attorney that I knew from Nashville review the agreement. to just make me feel better about the fact that, you know, this is a standard publishing agreement. You know, you
Yeah.
two are going to be 50-50 partners here. You know, the upside of an exclusive deal is that, you know, really the publishers aren't getting paid unless generally they don't want to take you on unless they think their effort and work is going to pay them too. You know, so I would call that having skin in the game a little bit. You know, my relationship with Bob has been wonderful, and it is to
Yeah.
this day. And we both still hope, of course, that, you know, those songs will continue to find homes. And of course, the royalties keep coming in. You know, I mean, as it is very much a numbers game. The more people that use those songs, the better my quarterly ASCAP, you know, statements look. And, you know, I've seen real growth over 10 years, slow growth, because I do think it's a very crowded field. You know, it's no secret. Licensing is not a secret anymore. I feel like there are a lot of people that still know that there's at least a little bit of money to be made there. And what I'm doing with these other songs, though, I feel like I'm starting my education again and starting relationships with a whole group of new people when thinking about how to try to get music into libraries. And I'm just at the beginning of that.
Awesome. And like, so how many songs do you have to work with now with the new songs?
Right now I have 21 songs that that I have all the rights to, and, you know, they're similar genre. But one of them is my latest album, 50 Weight, and I've been having great interactions with both exclusive and non-exclusive. You know, inevitably, I've been kind of bumping into some other exclusive publishers who I enjoy meeting because they continue the education, and I guess I've had enough success that they're willing to at least talk to me about, you know, what I'm looking to do now.
Yeah.
But I kind of enjoy the non-exclusive ones a bit more. I've had, I guess, a few different places that have accepted some. I've been going in slowly, though, not with all the songs. You know, I've been submitting a few here, a few there to try to kind of get a sense of maybe what makes sense for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I'm at the beginning. You know, just the beginning.
I mean, the huge advantage of non-exclusive is that, you know, it's okay if you make a mistake.
Right.
You know, I mean, obviously you still don't want to partner with people who are, you know, who have a lousy brand, and maybe being associated with them is not good for you. But
Sure.
It's just like, for me, I've signed, I think, 3 or 4 exclusive deals, and none of them have worked out for me. So actually one Dutch one in Holland. And that was the first one I signed, and I only signed over like 4 songs, and then they asked me to write a couple of others, which I did. And that was really sad for me because it was the first deal the exclusive deal I signed. So I actually have like the favorite track I ever wrote is with them. And
wow. And is it with them in perpetuity?
no, it's 5 years, so there's probably only a couple years left now.
I see.
Or actually probably only 1 year left. I need to check. But
Yeah.
I've kind of put it in the back. It's fine, you know. It's not a big deal because so I built a huge catalog, because at the time my mentor, the guy who got me into licensing, he was more of a production music type of guy. So I got into that way, whereas you're more of a traditional singer-songwriter. So it's a little bit difficult. But for sure, when you're working with a smaller catalog, so you're working with 21 songs, I think it makes a lot of sense what you're doing, and it just doesn't make sense to to sign that exclusive deal after doing your due diligence. I really love the fact that you got in touch with people that were composers, that were songwriters that were working with them already. I think that's something that's often overlooked, and just one of the easiest way to get honest feedback.
Yes.
And not being afraid to ask questions. It sounds like, you weren't afraid to say, well, I'm a little bit scared. can you explain this to me? And
Yeah.
that's so important because like if I know like it can be intimidating to ask those questions because you're afraid of, you know, sounding like an idiot, but actually if the person or missing out on the opportunity, but actually if the person is not willing to educate you, they're probably not a good business partner.
I agree.
Whereas in your case, like it's Bob, right? You said,
Yeah. Bob
yeah,
was
he was, you know, he's patient and taking the time, and he knows what it's like. He obviously understands songwriters and musicians, and he
definitely.
understands that our, you know, we those are legitimate questions, and he should take the time to reassure you and work with you.
And he
So
never pushed me, you know, and I
yeah,
appreciated that. I mean, it
yeah,
took me a few months to kind of do all of my research and to learn. And, you know, it took me so many years to even come to Los Angeles with that many songs and
yeah,
albums. He was in no hurry, and that was helpful for me. I, I think you make a good point because I certainly saw some other people that were making me offers that were very pushy.
yeah,
They made it seem like, oh, you have to do this now. And, you know, my natural instincts with those people were to just say, no, no, thanks. You know, I'll wait. Um, and it's hard because you do feel like, wow, here I am in, you know, this music city. Am I really missing out by
yeah,
not jumping on this opportunity? And I think generally you should just be patient and try to find the people, right, that you feel comfortable working with too. And I think your gut feelings usually guide you pretty well in those situations. You can kind of get a sense from just talking to people. I definitely prefer the telephone for me.
yeah.
Um, Once the relationship's been made, then the email seems to work much better. But you know, I feel lucky. I feel bad for you that you've had that experience with the exclusive because that was my biggest fear, that I'm going to like give over this big chunk of my work and then there will just be this person that kind of owns it and does
Yeah.
nothing with it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm still, you know, I don't hold grudges because you know, I knew they were actually very patient with me as well when I signed the agreement, and they made no guarantees. Um,
Yeah,
and and I know in one case I got real close to a huge placement, but it just didn't work out in the end, which is fine. And you know, the music is still with them, so we'll see what happens. But I also, you know, I didn't. For me, it's not as bad, you know, as bad as it would have been for you because it was. I'm less attached to my songs because I live um I don't live as long with them.
sure.
You
That
know,
makes sense.
I don't tour with them, and I write a bunch. And actually, that's something I'm thinking about. I've been thinking about a lot these past couple of years. Maybe for a very long time, I was focused on quantity and just assuming that there would be a funnel type thing where quality would come out, and it did. But it's still, I'm kind of rethinking my songwriting process to be more of a singer-songwriter approach rather than a music producer kind of, you know, churning out a bunch of. And I love that aspect because I actually love working fast. I work in sorry, in super short bursts, so it's a different exercise, but um it's a lot of fun, and I think it all comes down to that anyway. If you're having fun with while you're making music, it's all good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's good to change things up.
Yeah,
I've gone through plenty of periods where I completely changed the way I tried to write songs. And they don't always work out, but I do
yeah,
think the longer you do it, um, inevitably you have to shake things up and try different things.
true.
And it's good you don't take this stuff personally, too. That's probably another great lesson for your audience, that we're talking about the successes that I've had, but you end up getting a pretty thick skin and not taking things personally because there's
Yeah,
so much rejection that kind of just sort of naturally comes with this business. And yeah, I've really learned to just sort of try to let it slide off, and to try to think about it as, you know, what you're submitting to people. If they don't accept it, it doesn't mean they don't like it. It really could
yeah,
just mean that it's not what they need at that time. Um, And I've found that Bob has told me that he's had plenty of songs from my catalog that he's given to people, and they love the songs. It just doesn't fit that project,
Yeah.
and um, that tells me that maybe that person or that music supervisor, someday they still have that song in their head. Someday maybe they'll be working on another project and remember that, like, oh, Bob and Kelly had that one song that has grandma and rosary in it. And I've kind of, once the songs are released, try to detach from them a little bit, and just once they go out into the world, hope that they find a home somewhere. But that is really where I let Bob do his job.
Sure.
Now I'm trying to get them out into the world, these other songs, on my own, but it's the same lesson. I mean, the rejections are going to come, and I think that's just, as you get older, I think you don't take it personally, right? You just can't.
No, and I mean, something that I've been thinking as you were talking, I thought, and again, it's something I've been thinking a lot about these past few months and maybe even a couple of years, as I've never been attracted by playing on stage. I played the trumpet for an orchestra, but otherwise I've never been on stage with my songs. And I think, that going back to more, I'm playing a lot the piano and the guitar much more these days, and thinking, okay, maybe I could really focus on I've done a lot of, sorry, I'm jumping a little bit, but so I've written a lot of instrumental music in the past 15 years, because I used to write lyrics and they would come super easily, and then I lost a friend and I wasn't able to write for her when she passed away, and since then it's just kind of boom. I've written a few songs with lyrics, but very few, and anyway, and it's something where I'm like, okay, I need to take the time to find my voice again,
Yeah.
and I think the what I envy from what you're telling me is, I think that relationship with the crowd, with the audience, like that direct relationship, I think that's something that's extremely powerful, because when, like, your songs are good, you already know that, like, the people have already told you, they've already validated your art in a way. So I mean, I'm sure it's still difficult to get rejected, in other situations.
Sure.
But I think it's something that maybe in the tough days, I don't know if you ever thought of that, but if not, then maybe that can help you in the future if someone rejects a song. Just kind of remember that you have an audience who already showed you it's worth it, and it's.
Absolutely. And I feel very lucky for that too. And a lot of that audience is in Europe too, which is, for me, been one of the most wonderful things about the journey, has been being able to make these kind of great connections with, whether it's little distributors of music, venue owners, or more importantly, the people that actually come to those shows and have been on my email list for all these years. I do appreciate it, and I do not take for granted that I'm very lucky to have plenty of people who will give me that kind of support.
And
when days are like, wow, why am I doing this? Or everybody has those days too, right?
Yeah, of course. And let me ask you this. So you have these 21 songs that you want to kind of try to license yourself, like directly to customers, or through music libraries, or both?
Probably through music libraries.
Okay.
I don't have the relationships with the music supervisors personally. I've had a few reach out to me on social media, or what's changed with social media is, there was a show recently called Roswell, New Mexico, that's on a channel called CW here in the United States. And that music supervisor actually starts making his own Spotify playlists of the artists that he uses, and really highlighting the music that they're working on. So when a music supervisor does that, I try to follow them on, Twitter or social media to just sort of solidify that relationship, and let them know that I appreciate that
That's
they've
great.
used my music. So that's changed quite a bit for me in the last couple of years. It was not that way 10 years ago. But now with social media, I think it's even part of the show's, I'm guessing, marketing brand even. I think they know that the more people they get involved in the show, the better it will be for the show.
Sure.
But I'm thinking more music libraries, just because I really don't have a large network of music, studio people.
But see, that's the thing, like, because you're thinking of TV shows, but I was thinking, like, have you ever thought of sending an email blast to your audience and saying, hey, guys and girls, I've got these 21 new songs. You can listen to them here. If you work in content creation, if you make, if you're an indie filmmaker, if you are a podcaster and you'd like to license a track, I'd be really up for that.
I've never thought of that. You mean with my email list?
Yeah, with your email list.
That's a good idea. That is a
Because
good idea.
I'm thinking these people already like your music. They'll want to help. It's always, and even without thinking, oh, I'm gonna help out this guy. Maybe they would, they think, oh, what a great idea, So.
And I guess you never really know who they might know.
Yeah, and I mean,
That's
I don't know how
a
large
good
your
idea.
audience is, but it's something that that I tell like all the touring musicians I work with, like, when you're on stage, you can always like just mention it, even just in passing, at the end of the whatever, as a joke in between songs. Like, I think this song would be great in in this type of show. If you know anyone who works there, don't, let them know, whatever. Just, it doesn't have to be a big sell, but just
Sure.
letting everyone know you're open to licensing your music.
That's a good idea. I've only gone as far as I did create my own Spotify playlist that
Awesome.
are these songs specifically. And I sent out that link to my social media network.
Okay.
And for me, that's like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, because on LinkedIn, I do actually try to correspond with some music industry people.
Okay.
And again, this is all done with Black Toast Music's blessing too. So they have actually also helped kind of retweet those things. But I like the idea of going directly to my email list, because you never know. I guess you just never know what those
Yeah.
people are connected to. And you're right, they already like me because they've been putting up with my emails for many years.
Yeah, and that's also what I tell, like, when for musicians who are in smaller towns, I completely agree with you that it makes sense to be in Nashville, Los Angeles, and New York when you're at a certain stage in your career. Although I same as you, I wouldn't necessarily recommend people move there on purpose, because you're giving up a lot of stuff. I moved to London for work for a while. And everybody was like, oh, you're so lucky, you're going to one of the best cities in the world. And I was miserable. I was, my friends and family were away, and I was like, yeah, great, I've got nobody to share this with. So, anyway, so it's moving cities is a big ask. So I would definitely, people who want to do it, go for it. But if for people who are uncomfortable, or I work with a few musicians who are retired and from from a day job, and just want to kind of get started, but they're in a smaller community. And again, there's a lot of people creating content everywhere. You have a lot of production companies, ad agencies, a bunch of stuff. And for advertising, we always think of like McDonald's or Coca-Cola, like the happy adverts, but you have a bunch of more edgy adverts, and even your music, would go really well with like outdoorsy type of stuff, or
Yeah.
or more nature oriented type of visuals. So you just never know. Basically, it's just not making that judgment and letting others.
I enjoy being back in the Midwest too. I guess for your audience, just so they know, right now I'm in Indianapolis. That's the middle of America. I'm in my little attic studio. I'm very comfortable here too, because I think part of it still always has to be, where are you the most comfortable living? Because ultimately, I think you'll probably be able to create better that way too.
Yeah.
I enjoyed living in Los Angeles for all the reasons people like the nice weather, but it's a huge city. You know, I mean, it's quite different from anything connected to my songs, you know, or where I come from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really enjoy being here in kind of a mid-level city. But I think it for creativity alone, I think people should be careful about going anywhere just for business, music business, because you still need to create. And I still have that compulsion too, you know. As part of, we haven't even talked about that. As I get older, it's a different challenge to find different topics, you know, things
Yeah.
that I haven't covered lyrically that move me. And I think it helps me to be in a city where I have a social group of friends, a part-time job that kind of keeps me continually bumping up against people that have their own weird stories that I can kind of hear and listen to and kind of absorb, and hopefully, you know, have that inspire me to write about it.
Europe was great for that because I just go and sit in a cafe and read and listen to people's conversations.
And watch people
Yeah,
listen to
just watch
people.
people. But oh, I forgot what. Oh yeah, about moving to a different city or, you know, just for business. I was thinking that puts a lot of pressure on you, like financially or creatively. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier when you have a part-time job or full-time job, and even if you don't need the money and you just kind of keep it to stay grounded and stuff. Uh, you know, income streams in music are, you know, pretty up and down. So
Yeah.
just even with a part-time job, even if it's low income and you don't really need it, it's that kind of baseline security where it takes a lot of pressure out of the creativity, and you can just be free to create and free to be lazy one day, and, you know, free to be
Yeah,
completely unproductive for 2 months and be stomped or whatever. And I think that's super important as well.
I agree. I talked to, you know, lots of friends about this sort of left brain, right brain balance, you know, and I'm pretty pragmatic in a lot of ways. Like, I like checklists. I don't, I'm not afraid of doing admin work, you
Yeah.
know? So some of your steps that we're doing, they're not foreign to me from my day jobs. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's been good to try to look at these songs in a very kind of pragmatic way for keywords, for all of the things that you talk about, you know, in your steps of like how to really try to do that work early.
Yeah.
And that, I think, frees me to, like you said, kind of then when it's time to just sit with my guitar and try to, you know, tap into whatever that creative zone is. I think I need both. It's like it lets me
Yeah.
off the hook. It takes the pressure off that, like, you know what? I'm doing both sides. This is your time to just sort of focus on this. And that way there's less sort of desperation. You know, there's
Yeah.
less urgency. Some things I think you need to be urgent about. But for me, I can't really force myself to write. But I can at least force myself to carve out time that's just mine, where the
Yeah.
phone's off, it's just me, just sort of with my guitar, documenting, you know, whatever kind of comes out of my head, whether it's melody or lyrical ideas. That part's been really, really important to me. And I do it early because then it's a great start to my day. I can move on to any other day job work, or even more recently, this licensing work, which is kind of admin work for me.
Yeah, sure.
Computer time it's very heavy computer time.
Yeah.
And so it's been a good balance for me so far.
Do you, do you have a lot of time now? Like, would you be up for like talking about songwriting processes and stuff, or do you have to run?
Sure, I'm okay. Let me yeah, wow, it has been. Yes, I'm good. I'm
Yeah.
actually I'm sure. I'm happy to talk more.
Because otherwise, I was gonna say we can wrap it up, and you can like kind of tell me like the biggest kind of education points you've remembered from the past couple of decades. But if you have time, we can talk a little bit. I'd be interested to know more about your songwriting process. And you mentioned earlier that it's evolved along the years, and you kind of mix in.
Absolutely. I would say when I started, some of the first things I tried to write, I'm sure were very, too close to people like Neil Young or Bob Dylan or things I grew up hearing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing a lot of songwriters go through that, where you're trying to find your own voice.
Yeah.
But inevitably, your influences just come out too close. And even then, in my early 20s, I recognized that. I recognized that, like, okay, this chord progression, I'm hearing it because I've heard it my whole life and I love it, but it's not me. Like, I can't use that chord progression. So that was an early lesson that I think comes to most young songwriters as they're trying to learn their trade. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I do think, it's good to have people around you, if you can't hear it yourself, to kind of tell you, also that, like, hey, this is great. I love these lyrics. I love the story that you're telling, but it may be too much in the style of this.
And would you actively ask for people's opinions, or
I did. When I was younger, I absolutely did. I had, my wife would hear those songs. I met some of those mentors pretty early on in the process who had been releasing their own independent albums on Trailer Records.
An advantage of the smaller towns you get to.
Absolutely. Smaller towns, I don't want to undersell my small town. These artists, Greg Brown is a Grammy-nominated folk singer, so Bo Ramsey is produced one of the Lucinda Williams albums and toured with her. So though we were from a small town, I would say a couple of the people were very experienced, at about every level of the music industry.
Yeah.
It's based in my great little college town. I mean, it's a great little town because of that vibrancy and creativity. So I felt like I had a pretty good group of people who would help me. And after that first kind of basement demo recording, from that point on, my next album was really always working with producers, engineers, other songwriters, guitar players who were much better than me in their experience level. And that would be another thing that I would say helped me a lot. And I think it's good in life in general to try to work with people who have the skills that you don't have. And when I say better songwriters, I don't mean better songs. I mean, they just had been doing it 10, 15, 20 years longer than me. They were just more experienced. And it's so helpful when you have a young band like I did with this group of original songs that I'd written, to have people around you that can kind of help direct you. We were young and probably thought we knew what we were doing, but we didn't. It was very helpful to have experienced producer and engineer in there.
And how did you find them? Was that the label, or?
It was. Yeah, the first person that produced my first band album, David Zolo, he was the owner of the label, but he was also a wonderful artist, singer, songwriter himself. He still tours and plays today. So that was a wonderful benefit of just having, though we're the same age, he started much younger than me. He had more experience. And he was able to bring in his group of other musical friends to kind of help make the record sound a bit more professional. So that helped. I guess that would be my second thing to say to your audience, is that the sooner you feel confident enough to be reaching out to people who are better at the skills that you don't have, I think the better, because it I think it forces you to either get better at things that maybe you need to, and sometimes that's just ear time, right?
Yeah.
Time to just watch how an engineer or producer are listening to tracks coming back. And this is more for the recording part. But that was very valuable for me. And I do feel lucky that pretty early on in my album making process, I was given lessons that allowed me to kind of continue to always look for really the best musicians and most experienced people I could find when making these albums.
You know what, when you said that, it reminded me that for me with music licensing, I keep telling people, you need to put your music out there. You need to submit your music. If you're not quite sure if it's good enough, if you know it's not good enough, work on the music. But if you're not quite sure, just send it out.
Yeah.
And see what happens. And for you, it was going on stage. You're not quite sure if the song is good, but as soon as you go on stage, you know what you need to work on. And
yes.
When you submit your music to music libraries, it's a little bit different, because very often you just get the rejection or the acceptance. It's rare that you get constructive feedback when they reject you,
Sure.
unfortunately, but they don't really have the time, which is understandable. But the more you can put yourself out there, the music, and get that feedback, and the more you can spend time with people who have more experience than you, and compare yourself to them, not in a, oh boy, I'm really bad, I'm really lousy at this, just being gentle with yourself, like, okay, they just have more experience, so you can still learn, but just putting yourself in situations where you learn from others and you get information from the way people react, not just what they tell you, because people will, your friends and family will say your music sounds great.
Right. Right.
Will anyone come to the shows, or will the people stay when you're playing a open mic? Will they stay in the room or will they leave? That's information. So yeah, I think you make a great point about that, and getting that experience in the room as well is part of that.
Oh, absolutely. When I started, I was quite comfortable just writing songs and recording them in the basement. It was a learning curve to go from the open mics where I was still just sort of, alone with my acoustic guitar playing solo, to having a full band, which elevated it and changed the energy.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning, though, of, you're right, getting really good feedback, and learning about connecting, with the crowd. I can't say that I miss it. I've kind of gone full circle back to now, recording on my own and performing. But I do feel lucky that I got to do that, and I got to meet so many people doing that. You want me to go back to talking about my songwriting process from kind of where it started?
Yeah, go for it.
I know I got off track there with
No,
the
it's fine. I got off track too.
Because it's the, in some ways it's the same. I think that once I recognized that I was needing to find kind of my own voice, it made me listen differently to other songwriters that I really appreciated. But it also...
In what way were you listening differently? What were you listening for?
I was listening for what is it in these maybe chord progressions or phrasing, the way they would drop there, the way, that they would really be singing over these melodies. What is it that makes like that unique to, say, Bruce Springsteen or Tom Petty or Bob Dylan? Like, those guys all, if you broke it down to an acoustic guitar, have many songs that are very, very similar in how they're structured.
Yeah.
So what is it that makes, say, a Bob Dylan lyric sit on that chord so different than Bruce Springsteen when he's with his whole band? I started, I think, listening with a lot more attention to detail.
Yeah.
And then just being much more critical of myself when I would listen to my demos, just rough demos back, wanting to know like, well, what is it that I do? You know, if I take these chords that are, you know, we joke about it, just simple open cowboy chords that in some ways it's like a haiku poem. You know, there are so many people that work in at least this genre that I'm in. The challenge is how to stand out with your voice and your lyrics in this kind of Americana singer-songwriter alt country genre, because they're so similar structurally. The songs are very, very similar the more you listen to it. And I started to discover things that I naturally had kind of a little bit behind the beat, lazy drawl, almost the way my voice would slide in late. And I embraced it, that you know, that's sort of naturally where I want my voice wants to go. So I'm not going to fight that. I'm going to try to, in fact, expand on it and see, you know, like how behind the beat can I really be.
So you were being very intentional about the way you sing, for example.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was, and trying to, you know, and when you're starting, I think you're trying to find your voice, but I was finding that there were different keys, different ranges, and different styles of singing that were pleasing my ear more than others. You know, there's a very low kind of almost speaking voice tone that I will sing in range, but then there's a higher kind of lush range that I really enjoy too. Not really a rock and roll screamer. Like that's not a range that I enjoyed hearing my own voice.
And how did you work on that? Because what you just mentioned about the different ways of singing, I've noticed that in myself, where I have a couple of voices that I really enjoy. I think, oh, that's good. You should explore that. And then I don't. Like, how did you kind of, it's almost like you were studying yourself. Like,
I definitely was, because I think, you know, the first criticism that often, at least I'm thinking back to my 20s, was I really wanted to not be trying to emulate a vocal style of one of my influencers. You know, I was trying to find where my voice sounded natural and authentic. And I think the capo helped me tremendously. You know, the way I found it, I think, Joyce, was that I didn't start playing guitar until later. I still don't consider myself like anything more than really a rhythm picking kind of guitar player. But the capo freed me up to really take these same finger positions and just that would change the octave of my voice, right? And so I would listen to it, and I guess I have slowly found the keys that just feel natural. Like I've gotten to the point now where I feel like when I hear my recordings back, that sounds like my natural voice. Like that sounds like the way I'm supposed to sound.
That's great.
You know, the early stuff, of course, isn't available, but I have 5 old recordings where if I hear it, like I can tell that that is not my natural voice. Even a younger vocal cord, I was straining, or I was really pushing to be something that I wasn't, you know. In the mid 90s, of course, grunge was very popular. So I think when I listen back now, I can tell that I was trying to sound a little angrier maybe than I really, you know, was. I think having good wind is a big deal too. I don't exercise a lot, but I will say that I do enough cardiovascular, just bicycle, a little bit of elliptical training. I can tell when my wind is not strong enough to hold a note the way I hear it in my head.
Okay.
And at 51, I am aware of the fact that, you know, your vocal cords are, you know, a muscle that you need to take care of them, and they're not going to be there for you forever. So I try to be conscious of that. Like I can tell even singing old songs if I'm not in great shape because my wind won't hold quite as long as it should. And it's one of the things I like about some of my songs is a very long, extended, note that I can hold on a good day that I can hold. So those are some of the things that early on I tried to really be critical of myself about and honest with myself.
Yeah.
And, of course, I would take input from these other mentors when it came time for the recording. And I'm very lucky because early on, those were some of the lessons I was learning. I would maybe have a song written in a key for the band because, if you get on stage and you're kind of a little bit louder rock and roll band, it's easier in some keys for me to sing in a vocal key that cuts through that a little more. But
Okay.
when it came time to record the song, luckily, some of these older friends were wise enough to hear that in the recording studio, that's not your best voice. We should maybe change this key of this song. Forget how you do it live. Let's try it in this key because that's where your voice opens up a little more, and that's more your natural voice.
That's awesome.
So that was very
That's really
helpful.
great that they had that insight. Yeah.
Very helpful. A couple different people were very good at just sort of helping me hear that and recognizing that sometimes what you do live to perform for a crowd, though it's your song, you do it a little differently. It may be with a little more energy. And if you're singing in a much lower key, it's very difficult in a
Yeah.
loud environment to get that to cut through. So, it was just a necessary adjustment, that I had to learn along the way. And, I still do that today. There are some songs that I would never play live just because for me, it's a very perfect key for the studio with a very close mic, but it would never work live because it's just too quiet or
Yeah.
too breathy is maybe a better word to use. Songwriting.
Yeah. So earlier you were saying that like it's more in the way you approach, like the well, I don't know, because it's when I was talking about the fact that I need to change things up. So to give you some examples from like my past 3 months, I think I have different ways of being creative at the moment. I have the okay, be at the public library by 10 a.m. and work until you're hungry and and then go home. I have the do whatever you want to do and work whenever you want to work. I have the get up right right away until you're hungry and then get breakfast and exercise and stuff like that. And yeah, and the other one is like be lazy all day. So around 5 p.m. you panic and you start working.
Right.
And that's stuff that I mean, some of them, the panic at 5 p.m. or is a little bit of a different one, but otherwise all those kind of processes and practices, they usually work for me for around 2 weeks, and then I need to change things up. And with the creative process, it's similar, where I will work with an image for a few weeks, or I will work with a prompt, or just sitting at the piano or sitting with the guitar, stuff like that. And it's just stuff that works for a time, and that doesn't work anymore. I change it up and it works again, and then maybe I go back to the first one. And so do you have anything similar that
I do. And I think what you're describing there, I would guess is a pretty common occurrence for songwriters or anyone that's trying to be creative over an extended period of time, gets kind of into these ruts a little bit where I think you can tell too if you're really kind of critical of yourself, where you know when that process isn't working for you anymore.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've been through through a lot of these same schedules that you're talking about, especially, during the years where I had the full-time day job and was just playing mostly on weekends, traveling, out to cities
Yeah.
with my band. Those were the times where after 5 o'clock, I would have that desperate feeling of like, wow, I worked all day, but I didn't work on my writing. So that was more the periods of, it was like a desperation. I knew I needed to be writing, but not feeling like I had the time to do it,
Yeah.
especially with the commitments for the live performance. I don't miss that, but it also gave me the urgency, and I would say during those years, I was a little more, I don't want to say more productive, but there is something to be said for when you first kind of fall in love with a career or with something and you're doing it. I call it kind of that white hot passion period where most every waking moment of every day, my main focus was writing the songs, like breathing. So even during my day jobs, my mind was still thinking about the songs. And that was great because I was able to write a lot of songs that I'm still very happy with and that survive, on the albums and now, on all the streaming platforms. But as you settle into it being your full-time kind of life, that was when I would really need more structure, and balancing the travel and the touring with when to block out times where, I'm not going to think about booking, even though I need the money and I need to go, I need to go play shows at that time for, to pay my bills. I would have to consciously then really block out time for just the creative songwriting because my band was always wanting, they're a very hungry young band. They wanted me to be writing new songs so that we could make another album, so that we could go on these tours, So I think I had a period where it was much more urgent, and much more my 24/7 focus. Now, and really in the last 10 years, once the touring ended, now I've been all over the map, kind of like what you just described.
Yeah.
I'll go through periods. Currently, I really enjoy getting up early with my wife. And once she, goes to work, I have very early mornings, 6 to 8 is kind of what I block out to just sort of drift. Currently, my thinking is I've been dreaming a lot lately, so I want to be writing as close to possible as any dreams I might have. That could be totally wrong, but in my mind, that's kind of what's motivating me right now. Is that I want to be closer to that waking up period. But it used to be the opposite. I used to be a very late night person.
Same here.
The touring got me very used to sort of getting up very late and then staying up very late. And there was something about that kind of quiet middle of the night period that was good for me.
But I think it's the quiet in both cases, because I used to think I was an evening person, and then I tried going to bed early and waking up at 5 a.m. and I realized, oh, I'm also a morning person if I, if I go to bed early. It's just kind of really early or really late when everything's kind of still.
I agree. I definitely agree. And for more technical side of it, I very rarely write songs without a guitar in my hand. Another technique or phase I went through was much more the Bob Dylan style of just sitting at the computer and just working on words, working on stories, maybe just trying to write poems. That didn't last very long or work for me. I learned pretty quickly that, and it does for some people, but I learned very quickly that for me, there is just I don't hear it in my head unless I can tie the word to my right hand and a melody. And
so the melody and the words appear almost together.
Together, and the way my voice sits on a certain, chord progression, they feed each other. So I did learn pretty quickly. Even if we travel, even to this day, I'll travel with a little travel guitar. I do try to always have a little guitar around, just because I know that in my head, if I start hearing a melody, I will really need to try to track it down with a guitar.
And sorry to interrupt, but I really wanted to ask you this: like so you're strumming the chords and you're singing the words with a melody. Like, do you play around with the melody? Do you try different things? Because when you mentioned earlier that like your voice lands a certain way on the chord, is that something you're actively, thoughtfully experimenting with?
Definitely. And I do have a pad of paper in front of me, of course, too. Like I am sometimes these little story songs will come out complete, close to complete, and that's rare. It does not happen very often. That's always just a wonderful little surprise. But usually I am working through one or two little lyrical ideas that I've been thinking about, and yes, experimenting with the guitar and different chord progressions and different melodies and keys with my capo to try to find something. At this point, it's try to find something that I'm singing it in a way that I'm not repeating myself.
Okay. Yeah.
100 songs later, right? I covered a lot of ground. So it's really forcing myself to try to keep finding new ways to maybe have my voice landing over slightly different keys or slightly different chord progressions. And that's my biggest challenge, I would say right now, is how to not repeat what I've done before, just because it's comfortable. So I have been trying to, change up some of the chords and change up some of the keys, just to kind of hear as I get older, like if my voice will do different things, because as a listener, as a fan of music, I don't like hearing the same thing all the time from any artist. Sure. So I'm a fan of music in my own work. I'm trying to always be thinking of like, well, what haven't I done?
Yeah, and you don't want to be boring yourself. Like you don't want your work to be bored with your work.
Right.
Because I had a phase, it's been a long time, but I had a phase where I was writing, when I was still writing lyrics, where I was, at one point I was, for a period of a month, I was writing the same song over and over. It's really annoying, but I think it was because I was it was a period where I was writing a lot with the guitar, and I still am, but I was a very, even more limited guitar player back then. Mm-hmm. So I think it kind of, that influences and everything. And actually that's something else I wanted to ask you. Like, so it sounds like you always working like voice and guitar together, like that medium has really.
I do. There's one exception to that. I have a little over here. I have an old 1980s Casio keyboard.
Okay.
It's it has some pre-programmed little drum beats, very lo-fi. I will use that just for kind of a little bit of a tempo guide. Okay. To kind of help force me to sometimes to play things a little faster or to slow them down. My setup now is just a pretty basic Pro Tools home computer with a couple good microphones. Nothing's really changed since I was in my basement 25 years ago, except that I've gotten a little better with the Pro Tools so that if I do capture something that I feel very strong about, I know that it's a good enough audio quality that I might be able to take it into a real studio and have a real engineer help me flesh it out. But I don't use the computer drum beats, but I do like having this very lo-fi little kind of drum machine.
That's excellent.
Simple patterns. my keyboard skills are almost non-existent, other than I can by ear find my way around the melody. Once I've written it on guitar, I
Yeah.
can usually find it. It'll take me a little while, but I can usually find it. And sometimes by tracking a couple little bits of organ or keyboard with the drum beat, I can then listen back to it, and it'll help me rewrite it. It will help me think, oh, this may be better a little faster or a little slower.
Yeah.
It's helpful, but it's still pretty minimal. It's still the story, the tone of my voice. I mean, I think I will always be the hardest on my voice when it comes to any recordings. But when I'm writing, the focus is still primarily on, is the story, is it coming across? And is it coming across quickly? Do people get it pretty fast that, oh, this is going to be this kind of song? I don't do jazz improv, like I don't have any really surprising notes or chords that are going to happen. I keep using the word haiku poetry because that's sort of the best example I can give of the way I kind of consider the music that I work in.
Okay.
I never had a formal music background. Very much of my songwriting is really just technically trying to chase what I'm hearing in my head, and that's never changed. What's changed is now I'm not afraid to ask for help from other musicians and people that are just have more of a technical background, so that if I can sing a little thing I'm hearing in my head, they on keyboard or guitar are experienced enough to help find it quickly. And that's been great for me. That's collaboration has been a big part of my process too. We were talking earlier about finding people that are more experienced than you. It's why I still like to record my songs in recording studios, because it's generally that second phase of a song creation. And for me, the most fun in the world I have is when I get to go in a studio and work with musicians and give them the freedom to interpret a little bit as well. That's a very collaborative process. And though I'm the one in charge, ultimately, of giving direction, I've often found that letting people do what they're good at has helped my songs tremendously. My albums would not sound the way they sound had I tried to be too controlling over that process. And it's a hard thing to give control of sometimes if you're the creator of the song and the lyric. But for me, once I realized just how much better the songs could become if I would let other people contribute their gifts to them, I've never looked back. I still enjoy just a very spare version of my song and voice together, but I think I more appreciate when other people are contributing to it and lending their artistry to it as well. Like I'll never know how to make a snare drum with brushes sound so beautiful. Like I'll never know that, but I sure know that I love it when I hear it behind my songs,
I love that you mentioned that, because a few months ago I interviewed a music producer called Shrai. He's based in India, and when I asked him, like, so he makes a full-time living producing music for others, and he's managed to go from like nothing to a full income, I think in 4 years, if I remember correctly, maybe a little bit more. But anyway, when I asked him like what he would do differently, if he had to start over, what he would do differently, his answer was like, and he didn't hesitate, it was like, oh, I would collaborate much sooner. Like it's just because he used to be like super protective, and it's something that I have a hard time doing. And I think because at the beginning I didn't want to, I wanted to be completely independent, because I could see my cousins with their bands, they were always like having trouble getting everyone to,
Yeah.
in a room to
Right.
rehearse. So I thought I don't want to depend on people. I want to be able to do it all myself. But still, there is that power of collaborating and and just getting those different uh, feelings out there. And skills. Um, you mentioned you're a poor keyboard player. You have no keyboard skills. Piano is such an incredible instrument, and keyboards it adds so much to a track if
Yes.
in different ways. I'm a pretty poor guitar player, but and I can still write with the guitar. I can still come up with something pretty cool. But a real guitar player will just make it so much fuller and warmer
Yes.
and serve the song. And it's
Yes.
really something I need to remind myself of regularly. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, it's very necessary. For me, it's been very necessary. Part of it, I'm sure, is just sort of the natural insecurity of knowing that I didn't grow up with a musical knowledge
Yeah.
base. I know that the 88 keys, believe me, I wish that I had that paintbrush. That's sort of not been my experience, but yes, I like your story of the Indian producer, because I did learn by my second album, by the first real album proper that I made, just sort of how powerful it is to let go of some of that control, and to really let people contribute. And I've done a lot of interviews where the musicians that I record with and have toured with have chimed in that they appreciate that. I think a bass player, a drummer, keyboard player, guitar players, if they feel like they have the freedom to do what they hear also in your music, I think that it gets a different part of their they're contributing in a way. They don't get part of the songwriting cut, but they get to contribute, in their own way. And I just can't do without that. For me, it's really, it's one of the most enjoyable parts of music for me now. When I talk to people about not touring anymore and what gives me the most joy, I kind of really have gone back to doing the parts that I love the most. And I loved touring when I was younger, but believe me, I much more
Yeah.
enjoy being with my wife now instead of with four guys in a van on the road. It's a better life for me.
Yeah.
But the parts of music that I've always loved the most, I think, were the writing, and now the recording I enjoy just as much. Though I went into it as a novice, now I appreciate the art form of recording songs. So that's what I do. Honestly, I mean, that I've set my life up now, even, with my own music LLC for the last 10 years, that as these royalties come in and I see that bank account go up to an amount where I can afford to go record new songs, that's my prompt that I really need to get some songs together, because it's sort of, I try to keep continuing to write and record music, as long as I feel like my voice is still, good for the singing. As long as it still sounds okay to my ear, I would
Yeah.
like to keep doing it. But on a very pragmatic level, it's really looking at the bank account. And when I see that, that there's money to go record some new tracks, that's when I start thinking more seriously about certain songs and certain musicians here in my area, where I can start getting some studio dates on the calendar, so that I have a real deadline for, like, okay, we're gonna go track these songs. And that's coming up, I think, this fall. I've kind of, it's about that time right now for me to do it again.
I really like that approach of, how everything is feeding, I don't know, kind of a flywheel that's getting
Yes,
energy from.
definitely. And it's also kind of that, good feedback from the universe, or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it, as those royalties come in. That's also it's the good signs that, like, look, that's real money that's coming in for these songs you wrote a long time ago, some of them, but it's still my motivation that you need to keep doing it as long as you can.
Yeah.
And as long as you love doing it. And I do the parts that I love now, and that's a great luxury. Like I
Yeah.
really focus on the songs and the recordings, knowing that, you know, I can release them to the world like anyone now. I don't know that albums as a format make much sense for me anymore. We talked about my last album, 50 Weight, was a nice album bookend for me. But I've been thinking recently that, you know, as I record songs from here, I may, other than, you know, trying to work the licensing on them, I may just release them as I record them and get them ready for the public.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that, but for me, I almost feel like the album's a little over for for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably still makes sense for people who are touring as a kind of merch to
Sure.
sell at the end
Physical
of the
product.
show. Yeah, just having a physical product. But otherwise, like I've always been just like I work with 5 different pseudonyms and release stuff as it
Yeah.
comes. And sometimes it'll be a little EP, sometimes it'll be an album. It's always digital. Uh, I don't think I've ever made a physical product of my music apart from apart from my first demo that I printed and put in a case for my grandma, but
Sure, sure, sure.
that's it really. And I don't know. I don't know. Uh, I need to study the kind of performing artist world a little bit more, but from what I've read, it's more a singles market at the moment.
Absolutely.
And just
I
kind of
like the idea of being able to just put them out one at a time from here too, because you know, like anyone, my email list, my group of people that like my music, they're all on the streaming platforms too, and that's
yeah.
something that I can easily control. It just sort of feels like where we're at these days, and because I
And
don't tour anymore,
yeah,
maybe
and I
it's
think it's
better.
it's a nice way to stay in touch because, like, to record an album you're proud of, you need at least 6 months, if not
Yes.
more. If in terms of kind of incubating what you want to talk about in writing and recording properly. So it's a long process. And when I say 6 months, it's on the um, shorter time frames. So I don't know, releasing albums, I think, single is a nice way to stay in touch when you have that audience. For
It
my
is.
music, I don't have that audience, so it's not really something I think about a lot. I'm right now. I'm really focused on like um, kind of feeding my soul so I can find my voice again. I
Well,
don't
that's
know how
big.
to.
That's big. Yeah. No,
Yeah, it's a big
that's
thing. Like
big.
I've made so much music. I think I wrote like 300 over 200 songs in 3 years. Like in 2017, 2018, I wrote over 200 songs. And I think there's just,
Wow.
I went through something, you know, really tough in 2015. So I think it was part of kind of just kind of releasing raw stuff, but
Yeah.
without digging deep, without leaving it far, without having to deal with it too much.
Sure.
And I think I need to do that work for me, but also because, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't, in terms of my music, I haven't really ever connected with an audience. um and I think I'd like that. Like with creative and productive, I'm really enjoying the fact that people send me emails saying thank you, they leave a nice comment, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Every time, it makes my day, and
Sure.
I'm doing something really cool and positive, and I would like my music to do that, aside from just the kind of business aspect of you're producing something and then you're licensing it and earning an
Right.
income. I'm trying to I'm taking kind of that time, a little bit of time off from the admin side of licensing to focus on creating something that I can really be proud of, and like you, that in a couple decades I can still be proud of, even though I kind of cringe at at
Yeah.
some of it,
Yeah.
but something that's tangible that I'm proud of. And I think I would probably make it make it an album so I have it. I don't know that I would sell an album, but
Sure. Well, albums are different for me too, because they were all quite personal and they document certain parts of my life.
yeah,
So I look back at them now as really, you know, indicators of where I was at musically and personally. And then even at the songwriting level, albums, I've always tried to, once I had the group of songs I wanted for an album, the time it takes to sequence them and looking at all the lyrics and the whole story of like what the whole story is going to be, I just feel like I may be done with that phase. This last one was a perfect, kind of bookend to that, because I was able to go back to my hometown and record it with many of these same old mentors who are still working. And it just seemed like a good way to bookend 20 years of that. Now, I think I enjoy more the idea of recording them. And like you said, just sort of as they come to me and I can afford to record them in a way that I'm happy with, releasing them, out and letting people have access to those. I do like that part about technology, being able to communicate to people so quickly. Can't say that I really enjoy hanging out on social media a whole lot. But that's sort of the world we live in too, right? I mean, it's hard not to recognize that a lot of the people on my email list also like my Facebook page, and it's all kind of connected.
I've actually been thinking of killing my Facebook page.
Is it a business page or like a music page, or is it a personal page?
So yeah, my personal page, I've been thinking about deleting them all, but I think the creative and productive business page, I might just get, it's not really growing. It's not really, people are not really engaged in there. They're much more engaged on the website and on Twitter and on YouTube.
Yeah.
Instagram does nothing for me, and Facebook does nothing. And it's just like on Twitter, I think it's pretty cool. Twitter is a weird one because people get real angry on Twitter, but not at me. So it's not,
right.
A lot of, I get more engagement on Twitter than on Facebook, which is strange. It's kind of counterintuitive.
I think it's how I found you, by the way, Twitter.
Yeah.
I believe so. I follow a fair amount of music supervisors and people, and I think someone must have retweeted one of your
great
posts, and that followed me. That's kind of what I followed to
Awesome.
find your page, and that was why I commented. And that's the beautiful thing about social media as well.
Yeah.
My experience on Facebook has been okay because it's just a music page. You can like it or not like it, but I don't see anyone else's timelines. It's an extension of my personal website or email list. I don't engage a whole lot, but I guess I value when I post something. I understand that people like to share it with their friends, and that's great. But all of it has still been very secondary to this email list that I built over 20 some years now. That's where I get the real engagement with the people that I think probably, care the most about my music career. But it's tricky. You're right. Twitter is full of a lot of anger sometimes too. And
yeah, I mean, for me, I only get, honestly, on social media, I only get positive vibes for now. So it's actually something I've been thinking, I know that one day I'll get a hater and I'll need to deal with that. But so far, so far it's been only positive. So and to be honest, if it becomes overwhelming where I don't like the negativity, I think I'll just, I don't care how many people I have on that platform. The most important platform is the website and the mailing list, because that's where the real people are, the people that. So if it gets that way, I think, YouTube would be harder to abandon because they're a good platform to upload the video. There's that bandwidth thing going on. But anyway, social media is a weird one. I think it's it's a blessing and a curse. It's just, it's great as long as you don't let it distract you.
Exactly. I
And
think
they
if
have
it
a lot
starts
of,
taking away from your creative time,
yeah.
you got to get rid of it. I'm lucky enough, I grew up in an era where I'm not very addicted to it or my phone. I'm not all that, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything when I'm
Yeah.
not paying attention to social media. So,
I'm super addicted to my phone, so I just delete the social media apps.
oh,
I
good.
don't have them on there, and once in a while I'll install them. If I know that I want to communicate on stuff, but most of the time the social media apps are not on my phone.
Smart.
And, but I am addicted to my phone. It's something I'm really working on as well. It's like a constant work in progress, trying to figure different systems to be as productive as possible. But yeah. And, so yeah, I've really enjoyed us talking together. Is there? We should probably wrap it up because it's been a couple of hours, and
Yeah, it's a long one. It's great. It's
I
great.
actually love this format. I don't think I'm gonna do any editing. I'll just I think I'll put show notes so people can kind of skip ahead to the parts, maybe the
Sure.
like the songwriting stuff, if they're more interested in that. But is there anything like that you like? Do you have a few thoughts that you kind of feel are more important that you want to reiterate and
Well,
so
for your
very
audience, I'm assuming, they're all at different levels of songwriting
yeah.
experience. I would say stay true to yourself. Don't, though they may be learning from you how to do the admin side of getting into libraries and how to really be thinking about the important parts to that. When you're writing, I would say, at least in my experience, do what moves you, continue to do the things that kind of bring you joy. Be careful about, trying to write to popularity or to what you think people want. Generally, some people maybe can do that, but I think usually when people try to do that, it shows, it comes through as a little bit contrived. So I would say try to stay in that area, find that area that really moves you, because that comes through. I think when you're creating from a really like inspired place, whatever that is for people, that it comes through the music and your voice, however you're putting it across. I do think that comes through. And be, patiently persistent. For me, I've been, it's like a turtle. I feel like my music career has been a marathon, it's just very slow and steady. I still love doing it, so I keep trying to do it. And there's certainly nothing wrong with trying to figure out how to monetize it and make money from it. I mean, that's how I found you. And that's, I continually try to do that as well. But I would, yeah, be patient and don't take things personally. Try to develop that. If you don't know them personally, don't take it personally. It's sort of part of the process is that people are going to say no. And I think it happens to everyone at almost every level of music. Don't let that stop you from submitting music, because you're right. At some point, you need to kind of stop listening to what you've made, and you have to hit that send button and just send it out into the world. And sometimes it's the beginning of your education. You'll learn more if you just start getting it out there.
I think maybe it's like basically don't assume that people want you to write a certain way. Don't assume that they're rejecting you for whatever reason. Just
Right.
write what you need to write and want to write and put it out there. And actually I think for the songwriting part it's important that you do what you want to do. And even though I am teaching what I think is the right way to approach licensing, I think it's also important that everyone makes their own decision and do their due diligence, because it's something I try to put across in my writing. So hopefully I manage that. But I wouldn't want anyone to think that the way I did it is the only way to do it. And that's why I love talking to you. And you did it one way, and Chuck did it a different way. And Justin did it a different way, and Shry is making music from money from music a different way, and Rebecca, as well. All the people I've talked to, they're all making money from music in a different way. And that you need to be happy in that.
Yeah. We're all on our own journey, no matter what. That's a really good point you bring up, because my network of musical friends, it's the same. Everyone kind of has their own musical journey, and I feel like people that have done it for a long time, it's always that way. You come to it from different directions, start at different ages. Some people still work jobs, some don't. But I think if you're really passionate about doing it, I mean, the work ethic part, it doesn't really matter what your journey is. Like, as long as you're willing to kind of keep putting the work in, it's okay for you to have your own story and to work at your own pace. I started late, but now I've still been doing it for, over 20 years. Like, it doesn't really matter when you start. I think if you really love to do it, eventually, you'll learn more about your craft, and it will show. It will show.
Great.
Can't really think of any other tips. Just keep writing.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Keep writing.
It's been good to talk to you, Joyce.
Yeah, it was great. I'm super happy we got to talk, and hopefully we talk soon. Don't hesitate to email me, or if there's anything I can help you with, or drop a comment in the blog post. I was going to say, if there's anything that's unclear, because I do my best to write as clearly and to the point as I can.
No, it's great. It's a wonderful site. I use it as a resource for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks ever so much, and I love your music. Keep making it, and if you need any help, if you need someone to kind of talk to you about licensing, don't hesitate to reach out.
Right? I'll take you up on it. Thank you so much, Joyce. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.